The millionaire shouted at his son, "I'm going to disinherit you, you're useless." All because he married a poor woman who was a single mother. What his other son, deemed perfect, does after inheriting the company leaves the millionaire completely shocked. The millionaire shouted at his son, "I disown you, useless," all because he married a poor woman and a single mother. What the other son, considered perfect, does after inheriting the company leaves the millionaire completely shocked. The son was sitting behind the skyscrapers of New York, painting the windows of the 40th floor office in Salvador Tower with shades of orange. Victor Salvador, the magnate of the financial empire that bore his name, stared at the city with icy eyes, his hands clasped behind his back. His reflection in the glass showed a tall, imposing man, his grey hair perfectly combed, his tailored suit accentuating his still athletic figure despite his 65 years. "Mark is here, father." His secretary's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Let him in," he ordered without turning around. The door opened and Mark Salvador, the eldest son, entered the office. Unlike his father, he was wearing jeans and a casual shirt. His brown hair was slightly disheveled, as if he had rushed to make the appointment. "You're late," said Victor, still gazing at the city. "There was traffic," Mark replied, trying to stay calm. "And I don't understand the urgency of this summons. I was in the middle of an important meeting for my project." Victor slowly turned, a sarcastic smile on his lips. "Your project? That ridiculous organic cafe you want to open in the working-class neighborhood?" "It's not ridiculous, father. It's a sustainable business that can make a difference in people's lives." "A difference?" Victor laughed bitterly. "The only difference you'll make is wasting your potential and the Salvador family name. While your brother Alexander is closing million-dollar mergers, you want to play at being a hipster entrepreneur?" Mark clenched his fists, feeling the anger rise. Not everyone wants to spend their life accumulating money without a purpose. "Without a purpose?" Victor's voice rose dangerously. "I built this empire from nothing. I've given jobs to thousands of people. I've created a legacy that will last for generations. And you, my firstborn, would rather throw it all away chasing teenage dreams? Money isn't everything in life, father. There are more important things." "Like that waitress you've been seen around with?" Victor's eyes gleamed with disapproval. "Do you think I don't know about your relationship with that girl?" Mark took a step forward, his voice trembling with anger. "Sophia isn't just a waitress. She's an extraordinary woman who raised her daughter on her own, working hard to put herself through school. She has more dignity and courage than many of your associates in designer suits." "A single mother?" Victor shook his head in disgust. "Perfect. Not only do you want to throw away your future, but you also want to tie yourself to a woman with emotional baggage. What will the press say? What will our investors say?" "I don't care what they say. I love Sophia and her daughter Luna. And you know what? We already got married 2 weeks ago." The silence that followed was deafening. Victor seemed to turn to stone, his face shifting from red to white in seconds. "You... what?" he whispered, his voice choked. "I got married, father. No big ceremony, no press, no media circus like you would have wanted. Just us, a few friends, and a lot of love." Victor slowly crossed the room to his desk, leaning heavily on the leather chair. When he spoke again, his voice was as cold as steel. "You've dishonored this family. You've betrayed everything I've built. From this moment on, you are no longer my son." Mark felt his heart tighten, but he kept his head high. "I don't need your approval or your money. I have my project. I have Sophia and Luna. I have love, something you've never understood." "Love?" Victor stood up abruptly, slamming his fists on the desk. "Love doesn't pay the bills. Love doesn't build empires. Love is for the weak, and you've always been weak, Mark, just like your mother." Those words hit Mark like a slap. "Don't you dare talk about Mom. She at least knew what it meant to be human." "Out," Victor hissed. "Out of my office, out of my company, out of my life. From this moment on, Alexander is my sole heir. You will get nothing. Nothing." Mark looked at his father for a long moment, no longer seeing the powerful tycoon, but a lonely man consumed by ambition and fear. "I feel sorry for you, father. I hope one day you realize you've lost much more than an heir." He turned and walked out of the office, leaving Victor alone with his anger and his empire. As the elevator descended, Mark felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He was finally free. The shadow of the brother. Hidden in the shadows of the hallway adjacent to his father's office, Alexander Salvador had listened to every word of the argument. A cold smile spread across his clean-shaven face as he watched his older brother walk away. Finally, after years of waiting, his moment had come. Alexander entered the office without knocking, finding his father still standing behind the desk, his face twisted with anger. "You heard everything, I assume?" Victor said without looking up. "Yes, father." Alexander elegantly took a seat in the chair across from the desk. His $3,000 grey suit fit his slender frame perfectly. "Mark has always had a talent for disappointing you in the most spectacular ways." Victor slumped into his chair, suddenly looking older. "How could he do this to me, marrying that... a waitress?" Alexander finished, his voice dripping with disdain. "With a child to support, no less, a real scandal." But as he spoke those words, his mind wandered to Sophia. He had seen her several times at the cafe where she worked, long before Mark noticed her. Her natural beauty, her genuine smile, the grace with which she moved between the tables. Alexander had planned to approach her, but his brother had beaten him to it, as always. "We need to protect the company," Alexander continued, hiding his thoughts. "The press will catch wind of this soon. A Salvador giving up the empire for the love of a waitress? They'll eat it up." "You're right," Victor rubbed his temples. "Prepare a press release. Mark is out of the company due to differences in corporate vision. No scandals, no family drama. And what about his share of the inheritance? You heard him, he doesn't want our money." Victor looked at his younger son intently. "From today, you are my sole heir. The Salvador Empire will be yours." Alexander nodded solemnly, but inside he was exulting. "I won't let you down, father. Unlike Mark, I understand the value of what you've built." "I know." Victor stood up, walking toward the window. "You've always been like me. Strong, determined, pragmatic. Mark, on the other hand, he's weak," Alexander finished. "Like his mother." Victor turned sharply. "Don't speak of Helen, she was different." Alexander noticed the flicker of pain in his father's eyes at the mention of his first wife, but he ignored it. "I'm sorry, father. I didn't mean to upset you. Let's think about the future instead. I have some ideas for expanding our financial sector in Asia." As father and son discussed business strategies, Alexander couldn't help but think of Sophia. The image of her smile, now belonging to his brother, haunted him. But soon he would have everything: the empire, the power, and perhaps even the woman he desired. Meanwhile, in a small apartment on the outskirts of New York, Mark walked into the house, finding Sophia preparing dinner while little Luna, 8 years old, did her homework at the kitchen table. "How did it go?" Sophia asked, immediately noticing the tension on her husband's face. Mark hugged her tightly, breathing in the scent of her hair. "As expected. I'm officially disinherited." Sophia pulled back slightly to look into his eyes. "I'm so sorry, love." "Is it my fault?" "No," Mark caressed her face. "It was my choice, the best choice of my life." Luna looked up from her books. "Does this mean we won't be rich anymore?" Mark laughed, lifting the little girl into his arms. "It means we'll be free to be happy in our own way. Besides, I have some savings and the cafe project. We'll make it." Sophia smiled, joining the embrace. "Together we'll make it." Neither of them could have imagined that, in his luxurious office, Alexander was already plotting their downfall, obsessed with the idea of owning everything that belonged to his brother, including his family. The price of freedom. The small shop in the Brooklyn neighborhood was completely different from the lavish meeting rooms of the Salvador Tower. Mark looked at the still bare walls, imagining how they would one day be decorated with photos of local coffee producers and artwork from emerging artists. His dream was taking shape, even if not in the way he had initially envisioned. "Mr. Salvador," the bank officer's voice brought him back to reality. "I must inform you that your loan application has been denied." Mark rubbed his temples, already knowing the reason. "It was my brother, wasn't it?" The officer shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I can't discuss the bank's internal policies, but Yes, we received a call from Salvador Financial. They strongly advised against granting you the loan. I see. Mark stood up, trying to maintain his dignity. Thank you for your honesty. He left the bank feeling heavy. It was the third loan. Application denied in 2 weeks. Alexander was using his power to block every possible avenue of funding. His phone vibrated. It was Sophia. Love, how did it go? Her warm voice was like a balm to his frustration. Same as the other times. Mark sighed. Alexander is doing an excellent job of sabotaging every move I make. He can't keep this up, Sophia said. There has to be a way. There's always a way, Mark replied, an idea forming in his mind. Do you remember Robert, my old friend from university? The one who started that successful startup? Exactly. He always told me that if I ever needed an investor, he'd be there. Maybe it's time to call him. But I thought you didn't want to involve other people in this situation. We don't have a choice, love, and Robert isn't like the others. He understands my vision. As he walked home, Mark thought back to his university days. Robert had always been different from the other wealthy friends he had. He had built his success from the ground up, just like Mark wanted to do now. Meanwhile, in Alexander's office, a very different meeting was taking place. So the loan was denied? Alexander smiled on the phone. Excellent. Keep me informed of any new requests he makes. He ended the call and turned toward the large window. His reflection showed a satisfied man, but his eyes betrayed a deeper unease. On his tablet, a photo of Sophia with Luna at the park, taken by one of his informants. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Come in. Victor entered. The office, his gait slightly slower than usual. I heard you're handling the merger with Jiang Corporation brilliantly. Yes, father. The contract will be signed by the end of the month. Alexander quickly closed the photo on his tablet. How are you feeling today? I'm not here to talk about my health, Victor said, sitting down heavily. I'm here about Mark. Alexander stiffened imperceptibly. What has he done this time? Nothing. That's the problem. Victor looked out the window. He hasn't tried to contact me, hasn't asked for help, hasn't crawled back begging for forgiveness. Alexander finished with a sarcastic smile. Maybe he's finally understood his place. Or maybe... Victor hesitated. Maybe we've been too harsh. Alexander quickly approached his father. Too harsh? After what he did? Marrying that woman without your consent? Dishonoring the family name? It was the same when he was little, Victor murmured, more to himself than to his son. Stubborn, idealistic, just like Helen. Father, Alexander's voice was firm, we can't afford any weaknesses now. The merger with Jiang Corporation requires the Salvador family to appear strong and united. If you show the slightest doubt, they might reconsider. Victor straightened in his chair, the hint of vulnerability gone from his face. You're right, as always. Business comes first. Exactly. Alexander smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. And speaking of business, I have some interesting news about a potential investor who's considering helping Mark. Who? Robert Conti. Do you remember him? Mark's college friend who made it big in tech. Victor furrowed his brow. Conti? Yes, I remember. A self-made man, if I'm not mistaken. Exactly. And he could pose a problem for our plans. Alexander sat on the desk. But I already have an idea on how to handle the situation. Memories and revelations. The old playground had remained practically unchanged from 20 years ago. Sophia watched. Luna swinging on the swings, the same spot where she and Mark had first met, when she was serving coffee at the cafe across the street, and he came every morning, ignoring the disapproving glances from his high society friends. Mum, look how high I can go, Luna shouted, the wind tousling her chestnut hair. Sophia smiled, but her smile faded when she noticed a familiar figure approaching. Alexander Salvador, impeccable in his grey suit even on a Saturday afternoon. What a surprise to find you here, he said, sitting on the bench beside her. What? Do you want Alexander? Sophia's voice was as cold as the autumn air. Can't I pay a visit to my sister-in-law? His smile was calculated, almost predatory. I must say, life as a Salvador wife suits you, even if not in the traditional way. If you're here to provoke me, you're wasting your time. Alexander turned to look at her directly. Do you remember when you worked at Helen's cafe? I used to come often, long before Mark noticed you. Sophia looked at him in surprise. I don't remember ever seeing you. No, I suppose not. I was discreet. I watched you, admired your grace, your dignity despite the circumstances. He paused, looking at Luna. You know, I could have offered you so much more than Mark ever could. I never wanted luxury or power, Sophia replied, standing up. Luna, sweetheart, it's time to go. Alexander gently grabbed her arm. Wait, there's something you need to know about Mark, about his past. I don't want to hear your lies. Lies? Alexander chuckled softly. Has he ever told you about Valerie, the girl he abandoned when his father threatened to disinherit him the first time? Sophia pulled away from his grip. Mark has told me everything about his past. You can't manipulate me, Alexander. Really? His smile widened. Did he also tell you how he left her just when she found out she was pregnant, or how he accepted our father's money to keep quiet about the matter? Sophia felt her blood run cold. Mark had told her about Valerie, but not this part of the story. You're lying, she said, but her voice trembled slightly. Alexander stood up, brushing off his suit with measured gestures. I have all the proof in my office, documents, letters, even the confidentiality agreement signed by Valerie. If you want to see them. Mom, Luna had approached, sensing the tension in her mother's voice. Is everything okay? Sophia immediately composed herself, forcing a smile. Of course, sweetheart, let's go home. Dad will be waiting for us. Alexander looked at the little girl with an unreadable expression. Hi, Luna. I'm your Uncle Alexander. Do you know your father and I used to play in this very park when we were kids? Luna looked at him curiously. Really? Dad never talks about when he was little. No, I imagine he doesn't. Alexander bent down to her level. There are many things your father prefers not to talk about. Luna, let's go. Sophia took her daughter's hand, giving Alexander a warning glance. As they walked away, Alexander stood watching them, a smile still on his lips. The seed of doubt had been planted. Now he just had to wait for it to grow. Meanwhile, in an elegant downtown restaurant, Mark was sitting across from Robert Conti, his old college friend. Time had left few traces on the successful entrepreneur's face, but his eyes showed the wisdom gained over the years. So, said Robert, sipping his wine, you want to open an organic cafe that supports local small producers and offers job opportunities to disadvantaged youth? I know it seems like a small project by your standards, admitted Mark. On the contrary, Robert smiled. It reminds me exactly of how I started. A dream that everyone called crazy, but one that had a real social purpose. So, are you interested in investing? Robert set down his glass, his expression suddenly serious. First, I have to ask you something, Mark. Is it true what they say? That you gave up everything for love? Mark nodded. Sophia and Luna are my life now. I don't regret anything. Even though your brother is doing everything he can to block your project? Mark looked at him in surprise. How do you know that? New York is a small city when it comes to business, Robert leaned forward, and Alexander is making a lot of enemies with his aggressive methods. I don't want to drag you into a family feud, Robert. Too late, Robert smiled. I'm already involved. And you know why? Because I see in you the same fire I had when I started. The desire to change things, to make a difference. Shadows of the past. Sophia couldn't sleep. Alexander's words kept echoing in her mind as she watched Mark sleeping peacefully beside her. Valerie, a hidden pregnancy, a silence agreement. Could it be true? Her Mark, the man she knew for his honesty and integrity, could he have done something like that? She got up quietly from the bed and went to the kitchen. The apartment was small but cozy, very different from the luxurious properties of the Salvadors. As she prepared a cup of tea, her gaze fell on an old photo of Mark with his brother, taken during their childhood. Two smiling boys, still unaware of the future that awaited them. The sound of light footsteps made her turn. Luna was standing at the kitchen door, clutching her teddy bear. "Can't sleep, sweetheart?" asked Sophia, opening her arms. Luna ran to hug her. "I had a bad dream. That uncle we met at the park was in it. He said Dad has secrets." Sophia felt her heart tighten. "Sweetheart, everyone has secrets, but what matters is what we do in the present, the choices we make every day. Like Dad's choice to leave his rich family to be with us." "Exactly," Sophia smiled, stroking her daughter's hair. "That was a choice of love. But Uncle Alexander seemed sad when he talked about Dad." Sophia hesitated, searching for the right words. Sometimes people are sad because they can't have what they want, even if what they want belongs to someone else. At that moment, Mark appeared at the door. "What's going on? A midnight meeting without me?" Luna ran to him. "Dad, we were talking about Uncle Alexander." Mark's smile froze slightly. Sophia noticed the change in his expression. "He came to the park today," said Sophia, studying her husband's reaction. "He mentioned a certain Valerie." Mark visibly paled. "Sophia, Not here," she interrupted him, glancing at Luna. "Sweetheart, it's time to go back to bed." After putting Luna to sleep, Mark and Sophia sat down on the small balcony. The city sparkled below them, indifferent to the drama unfolding. "I should have told you sooner," Mark began, his voice heavy with remorse. "Valerie was my girlfriend in college, the daughter of one of my father's most important business partners. Alexander says she was pregnant when you left her." Mark closed his eyes, the pain evident on his face. "That's not how it happened, Valerie. She had issues. When she said she was pregnant, I wanted to take responsibility. But then we found out it was a lie, one of many. She was trying to manipulate me, to tie me to her." "And the confidentiality agreement?" "That's true. My father insisted on protecting the family name, but the money wasn't to buy her silence. About the pregnancy, it was for her treatment. She needed professional help." Sophia felt a weight lift from her heart, but a new concern took its place. "Why is Alexander bringing this up now?" "Because he knows how to hurt me." Mark ran a hand through his hair. "Not through me, but through the people I love. He's trying to cast doubt on everything we've built." "Mark," Sophia took his hands, "is there anything else I need to know? Anything Alexander could use against us?" Mark hesitated for a moment. "There's one thing, but it's not about the past. It's about the present. Robert Conti has agreed to invest in our project." "That's good news, right?" "Yes, but—" Mark bit his lip. "Robert also has information on Alexander. Information that could seriously damage his position in the company." "What kind of information?" "He hasn't given me the details yet, but it has to do with some suspicious financial operations Alexander has conducted over the past few years. Robert wants to use this information as leverage to protect us from my brother's interference." Sophia stood up, agitated. "Mark, this is dangerous. I haven't known your brother for long, but I've seen the way he looks at you. There's something obsessive about his behavior." "I know," Mark hugged her from behind, "but we can't keep living in fear. Robert might be our only chance to free ourselves from Alexander's shadow." As they embraced under the stars, neither of them could have imagined that, at that very moment, Alexander was watching the lights of their apartment from his SUV parked across the street, his tablet displaying photos of Sophia taken that afternoon in the park. Robert's proposal. The next morning, Robert Conti's office was an oasis of modernity and technology in the heart of New York. Large windows offered a breathtaking view of the city, while the walls were adorned with digital art and screens displaying real-time data. "Are you sure about this information?" Mark asked, flipping through the dossier Robert had just handed him. "Absolutely." Robert leaned against his glass desk. "I have proof that your brother used company funds for personal operations. He created a network of shell companies to hide illegal transactions." Mark continued reading, his face growing darker. "This could destroy not only Alexander, but the entire family business." "Exactly," Robert smiled, "and that's where you come in." "What do you mean?" "Think, Mark. With this information, you could reclaim your position in the company. Your father would have no choice but to listen to you when he finds out what his perfect son has done. Mark closed the dossier decisively. I don't want to use blackmail, Robert. I'm not like them. It's not blackmail. Robert stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. It's justice. Alexander is trying to destroy you and your family. This is self-defense. And what do you want in return? Mark asked, looking his friend in the eye. Robert stepped back, gazing out the window. I want a seat on the board of Salvador Financial. Your support would be appreciated, so it's not just to help me. Things are never that simple in the business world, Mark. You know that. Robert turned, his gaze intense. But that doesn't mean I don't care about you as a friend. We can help each other. Mark stood up, walking toward the window. From there, he could see the Salvador Tower rising into the New York sky, a monument to his father's ambition. I need time to think about it, he finally said. Not too much time, Robert warned. Alexander is already making his moves. I've heard he's preparing something big. What? I'm not sure, but he's had several meetings with people, let's say, of questionable repute. He's digging for information about you, about Sophia, even about Luna. Mark felt a chill run down his spine. I have to protect them. Then use this information, Robert insisted. It's the only way to stop your brother once and for all. At that moment, Mark's phone buzzed. It was a message from Sophia. Alexander is here at the cafe. He wants to talk to me alone. Mark felt his blood run cold. I have to go. Mark, Robert called as he headed for the door. Remember, you don't have much time. Alexander won't stop until he gets everything he wants. As Mark rushed to his car, he couldn't help but think about Robert's words. He had always tried to be different from his family, to avoid falling into the game of power and manipulation. But now, with the people he loved in danger, could he afford to hold on to his principles? At the cafe, Sophia sat across from Alexander, trying to stay calm as he told her a very different version of Valerie's story. His smile was kind, almost brotherly, but his eyes gleamed with an unsettling light as he spoke about Mark's past, skillfully blending truth and lies into a toxic tale aimed at undermining Sophia's trust. I'm not telling you this to hurt you, Alexander said, his voice smooth as silk. But I think you deserve to know the man you married, the real Mark Salvador. Sophia kept her gaze steady. The real Mark is the man I know today, not the one he was years ago. Oh, Sophia, Alexander shook his head with a sad smile. Does love make you so blind? Or maybe... He leaned slightly forward. Are you just trying to convince yourself? Truth and lies. When Mark arrived at the cafe, he found Sophia and Alexander still sitting across from each other, the air thick with tension. His brother's smile widened as he saw him enter. Ah, here's the star of our conversation, Alexander said, rising with deliberate calm. We were just talking about the past, weren't we, Sophia? Sophia immediately stood up, moving to Mark. Her face was a mask of calm, but Mark could feel her body trembling slightly as he embraced her. Alexander, Mark's voice was controlled, but his eyes burned with anger. Whatever game you're playing, stop it now. Game? Alexander feigned surprise. I'm just helping your lovely wife get to know the family she's married into better. I was telling her about the time you nearly bankrupted the company with a reckless investment. Or would you prefer I talk about how you abandoned Valerie when she needed you most? Enough! Sophia stepped between the two brothers. I don't want to hear any more lies. Lies? Alexander chuckled softly. Mark, why don't you tell Sophia about the meeting you just had with Robert Conti? About the information you have on me? Or do you want to keep that a secret too? Mark paled slightly. Sophia turned to look at him, confused. What is he talking about? Not here, Mark said, taking Sophia's hand. Let's go home. Yes, go. Alexander picked up his expensive jacket. But remember, brother, every secret has its price, and I'm willing to pay any amount for the truth. As he walked away, he paused at the door. Oh, Sophia, Luna is such a lovely child. She has the same dreamy eyes her father had at her age. It would be a shame if she had to see her perfect family fall apart. Mark took a step forward, but Sophia held him back. Alexander stepped out into the New York sunshine, leaving behind a silence as heavy as lead. On the way home, neither of them spoke. Only when they were in their apartment with Luna still at school did Sophia bring up the matter. "What do you know about Alexander?" Mark sank heavily onto the couch. "Robert found out that Alexander has been involved in some illegal financial dealings. He has proof. And what do you plan to do with that proof?" "Robert suggests using it as leverage to protect us and our project." Sophia knelt in front of him, taking his hands. "Mark, look at me. Are you sure Robert is telling the truth? That he's not trying to manipulate you too?" "I've known him for years, Sophia. He's my friend." "Alexander was your brother too," Sophia said softly. "And look what he's become." Mark stood up, pacing nervously around the room. "I can't keep going like this. Alexander is threatening our family, trying to undermine everything we believe in." "Maybe that's exactly his goal," Sophia reflected. "He wants to push you to become like him, to use the same methods you've always despised." "And what should I do? Stand by while he tries to destroy us?" "No," Sophia moved closer, embracing him. "But we have to be smarter than him. We can't let him change who you are, who we are." At that moment, Mark's phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Hello? Mark Salvador?" A vaguely familiar female voice. "It's Valerie." Mark stiffened, his blood running cold. Sophia looked at him, concerned. "Valerie? After all these years?" "I know. It's strange for me to call you now." The voice trembled slightly. "But your brother came to see me. He made me an interesting offer." "What kind of offer?" "He wants me to tell my version of the story, publicly. He says it's time for the truth to come out." Mark closed his eyes, feeling the weight of all the lies and half-truths from the past. "And what did you say?" There was a long pause on the other end. "I thought you should know. Alexander. There's something off about him. The way he talked about you, about your wife." "Valerie, listen." "No, Mark, you listen. What happened between us is in the past. I made my mistakes. You made yours. But what Alexander is doing, it's not normal. Be careful." The weight of power, Victor Salvador watched the sunset from his villa in the hills of New York, a glass of aged scotch in his hand. The walls of his study were covered with photographs that told the story of his empire, handshakes with politicians and industrialists, inaugurations of new offices, moments of corporate triumph. But his eyes were fixed on one photo in particular, him with his two young sons, Mark and Alexander, on a rare day at the beach. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." His housekeeper, Mary, entered hesitantly. "Mr. Salvador, your son Alexander is here. Send him in." Alexander entered the study, his presence immediately filling the room. "Father, we need to talk." Victor didn't turn around. "About Mark?" "No." Alexander approached the desk. "About Robert Conti." That caught Victor's attention. "What does Conti have to do with this?" "He has information about me. Information that could create problems." Victor set down his glass, studying his son carefully. "What kind of information?" "Some financial operations I conducted. Operations necessary to protect the company, but which could be misunderstood." "Misunderstood?" Victor's voice turned sharp. "Or illegal?" Alexander kept his gaze steady. "I did what was necessary. For the company. For the family." "For the family?" Victor slowly stood up. "Or for yourself? What do you mean?" "I've seen how you look at your brother's wife," Victor said, his voice heavy with disapproval. "I've seen how you pursue her, how you try to manipulate the situation." Alexander paled slightly. "You don't know what you're talking about." "No." Victor picked up an envelope from the desk and threw it on the table. Photos of Alexander following Sophia, watching her in the park, secretly photographing her. "Do you think I don't know what happens in my own family?" "Who gave you these photos?" "I have my sources." Victor stepped closer to his son. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out the truth? That I wouldn't understand your obsession with Sophia is the real reason behind all this?" Alexander tried to stay calm, but his hands trembled slightly. "You're twisting everything." "I'm just trying to protect the company from Mark and his recklessness." "No," Victor shook his head sadly. "You're trying to destroy your brother to have what he's always had, and you haven't. The ability to truly love." "I'm the one who sacrificed everything for the company," Alexander exploded. "I'm the one who followed every rule, every order. And what did I get? A weak brother who marries a waitress is celebrated as a romantic hero, while I'm just the obedient son." "Alexander," Victor's voice softened slightly, "you've never understood that obedience isn't love. Loyalty isn't passion. You've spent so much time trying to be perfect that you've forgotten how to be human." "You have no right to judge me," Alexander hissed. "You made me this way. You taught me that power is everything, that feelings are a weakness. And now I see my mistake." Victor turned toward the window. "I created a monster in my attempt to forge the perfect heir." "A monster?" Alexander laughed bitterly. "No, father. You created exactly what you wanted, someone willing to do anything for power. And now you can't complain if I use that power as I see fit. Even if it means destroying your brother, his family? Especially if it means that—" Alexander picked up his jacket. "And if you try to stop me, the information Robert Conti has might suddenly become public. Are you willing to risk your entire empire to protect Mark?" Victor looked at his son with a new awareness, seeing for the first time the emptiness behind his mask of perfection. "What happened to the boy you were, Alexander? What happened to my son?" "That boy disappeared a long time ago, father, just as you wanted." The restaurant was nearly empty when Valerie walked in, her high heels clicking on the marble floor. Mark recognized her immediately. Despite the years, she still carried that aristocratic elegance that had always defined her. He stood to greet her, noticing how time had changed her, yet left her remarkably similar to the girl he had known in college. "You came alone," she said, sitting down. "It wasn't a question." "Sophia knows I'm here," Mark replied. "We have no secrets." Valerie smiled slightly. "It must be nice to have that kind of trust. In our day, it was all about appearances and half-truths. We've grown, Val, we've changed. Some more than others," she said, opening her designer bag and pulling out a folder. "Your brother has visited me 3 times in the last week. He offered me 2 million euros to tell a altered version of our history." Mark felt his blood run cold. "What version?" "The one where you abandoned me when I was really pregnant, paying me to disappear." Valerie looked him in the eyes. "He prepared fake documents, testimonies, even a fake pregnancy test from back then. He's obsessed with destroying your reputation." "Why are you telling me this?" Valerie leaned forward. "Because I saw something in his eyes that scared me, Mark. He's not the jealous boy we used to know anymore. There's something twisted in him now." "I know," Mark sighed. "He's obsessed with my wife." "It's not just that." Valerie opened the folder. "I did some research after his visit. I still have friends in the right circles. Look." Mark took the documents she handed him. They were detailed reports on Alexander's activities, photos of secret meetings, transcripts of conversations. "He's created a network of shell companies," Valerie explained, "not just to hide illegal financial operations, but to build some kind of parallel empire. He's preparing something big, Mark. Robert Conti gave me similar information." "Conti?" Valerie stiffened. "Don't trust him." "Why? He's a friend of mine." "He's in business with Alexander," she said, pulling out more photos. "They've been meeting regularly for months. What he showed you is probably just what Alexander wanted you to see." Mark felt the floor give way beneath him. But why? What would their goal be? "I think they want to push you into doing something reckless. Alexander knows you're honest, that you have principles. If he could make you act against those principles, he could use it against you." "And you? Why are you helping me?" Valerie smiled sadly. "Maybe to make up for my past mistakes. Or maybe because, despite everything, you were the only one who helped me when I really needed it, when everyone, including my family, just wanted to hide my instability." Mark remembered those difficult times, Valerie's breakdowns, his support. in convincing her to seek professional help. "How are you now?" he asked gently. "Better, much better. I have a normal life, a job I love, my own family." She paused, looking at him intently. "And it's also thanks to you, Mark. If you had gone along with it back then, if you had accepted that fake pregnancy like your father wanted to save face, I don't know where I'd be today." "Val, No, let me finish," she interrupted him. "That's why I can't let Alexander use that story to destroy you, not when the truth is that you saved me." At that moment, Mark's phone vibrated. It was a message from Sophia. "Luna didn't come back from school. I called. They said Alexander picked her up before classes ended. He's not answering his phone." Mark stood up abruptly, panic tightening his throat. "What's wrong?" asked Valerie, alarmed by his sudden change. "Alexander took my daughter." His voice trembled with anger and fear. "I have to go." "I'm coming with you," said Valerie, gathering her things. "I know where they might be. Alexander mentioned a villa by the lake, a place you used to go as kids." Mark looked at her in surprise. "Salvador Tower, but it's been abandoned." "For years. Exactly, the perfect place to hide." As they left the restaurant, Mark couldn't help but feel that the circle was closing. The past and present were merging into a dangerous whirlwind, and at the center of it all was her family. Memories by the Lake Salvador Tower stood like a ghost. On the shores of Lake Como, its once elegant walls now covered in ivy. Luna gazed out from the second-floor window, watching the sun begin to set over the calm waters of the lake. She wasn't afraid, not yet. After all, her Uncle Alexander had been kind to her, buying her ice cream and telling her stories of when she and her father were children. "Do you like the view?" Alexander stood in the doorway, his usual impeccable suit strangely out of place, in the abandoned villa. "It's beautiful," Luna replied. "But why are we here? Mom will be worried." "Oh, don't worry. I sent your mother a message," he lied, stepping closer to the window. "You know, your father and I spent every summer here as kids. That boat over there? It was our favorite. We called it Freedom." Luna smiled. "Dad never told me about this place. Your father prefers to forget many things about his past," Alexander said, a shadow crossing his face. "But this place holds all our secrets." Meanwhile, on the road to the villa, Mark was driving like a madman, with Valerie by his side trying to calm him down. "Mark, slow down. It won't help if we end up off the road." "I can't believe it's come to this," he said, gripping the steering wheel. "Taking Luna, it's unacceptable." "Alexander has always been obsessive," Valerie said. "Remember that time at the swim meet, when he sabotaged your swimsuit because he couldn't stand the idea of you winning?" "We were 12, Mark shook his head. "I thought it was just sibling rivalry." "No, it was more than that. I always saw something in his eyes when he looked at you, a mix of admiration and hatred. He wanted to be you, Mark, and at the same time, he wanted to destroy you." At the villa, Alexander was showing Luna an old photo album. "See this?" He pointed to a faded photo. "Here, your father won a swim race. Everyone adored him, as always, the perfect Mark Salvador." "You sound angry," Luna observed with the innocent insight of a child. Alexander paused, looking at her in surprise. "Angry? No, little one, I'm disappointed. Disappointed that your father chose to abandon all of this. His family, his destiny. But he chose me and Mom," Luna said simply. "And we're happy." Alexander felt something twist inside him. Happy in that tiny apartment, without luxuries, without the respect you deserve. "We have love," Luna said, repeating the words she had often heard from her mother. "And Dad says love is worth more than all the money in the world." Alexander laughed bitterly. "Love? Do you know what our father taught me about love? That it's a weakness. That power is the only thing that truly matters." He stood up, pacing nervously around the room. "I followed every one of his rules, did everything he wanted, and what did I get? A brother who despises everything I've worked for, who still gets everyone's love, and a woman—" He stopped, realizing he was talking more to himself than to the child. Luna looked at him with a mix of confusion and compassion. "Uncle Alexander, are you sad?" The question hit him like a slap. He turned to the window, trying to regain control. It was then that he saw Mark's car approaching the villa. "It's time to play," he murmured to himself. Then, turning to Luna, with a forced smile. "How about we play a trick on Dad? We'll hide and see how long it takes him to find us." Luna hesitated. For the first time, something in her uncle's voice made her feel uneasy. "I want to call Mom." "Later," he said, taking her by the hand. "Let's play first." As he led her toward the stairs that led to the old boathouse, Alexander felt his excitement grow. Finally, after all these years, he would have his revenge. Mark would learn what it means to lose what you love most. And maybe, just maybe, Sophia would finally see the true face of her perfect husband when he was forced to choose between his precious moral compass and his family. Echoes of the past. The villa seemed larger and more menacing than Mark remembered. As he parked the car in the overgrown driveway, memories of his childhood washed over him like waves. The endless summers, the swimming races in the lake, the laughter that once filled those now empty rooms. "Wait here," he told Valerie. "I need to face him alone." "Mark," she grabbed his arm. "Alexander isn't the boy we used to know. He's dangerous." "I know," he replied, his eyes fixed on the villa. "But he's still my brother." He entered. The villa, the marble floor creaking beneath his feet. The air was heavy with dust and memories. The once elegant curtains hung like ghosts from the windows, and the furniture was covered in yellowed sheets. "Alexander," he called, his voice echoing through the empty rooms. "Where are you?" "In the music room," came a familiar voice. "Where—" "It all began, remember?" Mark followed the voice to the second floor. The music room had been their mother Helen's domain. The grand piano still dominated the room, though it was now covered in dust. Alexander was sitting on the piano bench, but Luna wasn't with him. "Where's my daughter?" "She's safe," Alexander smiled. "With Robert. She's out on the lake in the old Liberty. She loves it." Mark took a step forward, anger rising. "If anything happens to her—" "What will you do?" Alexander interrupted. "Report me, scandalize the public, ruin the family name." He laughed bitterly. "Oh, wait, you've already done that. This is between you and me, Alexander. Luna has nothing to do with it." "On the contrary," Alexander stood, running a hand over the dusty piano. "Luna has everything to do with it. She's living proof of your happiness, your ability to love and be loved." He turned to his brother, his eyes gleaming with a feverish light. "You know Mom always played Chopin when we were sad? She said music could heal any wound." "Mom understood. Love," Mark said. "You chose to follow Dad's teachings." "Chose?" Alexander laughed, a bitter sound that filled the room. "Do you really think I had a choice? After you, the perfect son, decided to follow your dreams, someone had to be the Dad wanted. You could have made your own choices. Like you? Abandon everything for a waitress and her child?" Alexander stepped closer to his brother. "Or maybe you'd have preferred I found my great love too. Maybe Sophia. If I'd gotten to her before you." Mark looked at him, stunned. "You were in love with Sophia? In love?" Alexander shook his head. "I saw her first. I watched her for months at that cafe. I planned every detail of how to approach her. But then you came along with your damn natural charm and she chose you like everyone always chooses you. Alexander, this is absurd. You can't live your life in the shadow of your unfulfilled desires." "Can't I?" Alexander pulled out his phone. "Look at the screen. Robert is waiting for my signal. One word from me and the boat with your precious Luna will have a technical malfunction. Unless what?" Mark's voice was as tense as a violin string. "Unless you give up everything. The company, Sophia, everything. Sign a statement admitting your past misdeeds, confirm Valerie's story, and disappear. Forever. And you think this will give you what you want? That Sophia will magically love you if I disappear?" "No," Alexander smiled sadly. "But at least I won't have to see your perfect happiness every day. I won't have to endure Dad's disappointed look when he compares me to you. I won't have to—" He was interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Both brothers turned toward the door, where Victor Salvador appeared, his face a mask of shock and disapproval. "Dad?" whispered Alexander, his voice betraying fear for the first time. "What are you doing here?" "Valerie called me," said the patriarch, slowly entering the room. "She told me everything, about the blackmail, your obsessions, your plans." "You can't believe that crazy woman," hissed Alexander. "She's lying, like she always does." "No," Victor shook his head. "The only liar here is you, my son, and the worst part is that you've been lying mostly to yourself." The reckoning Victor moved further into the room, his steps heavy on the old wooden floor. For the first time in his life, Alexander seemed small, vulnerable, like the child who desperately sought his father's approval. "I have proof of everything," Victor continued. "Your illegal financial operations, your meetings with Robert Conti, even the photos you've taken of Sophia over these months. Did you really think I wouldn't notice anything?" You had me spied on," Alexander stammered. "I had you protected from yourself," Victor corrected. "I saw the signs, the growing obsession, the spiral of lies. But I hoped you would find the strength to stop yourself." Mark looked at his father with newfound respect. "You knew everything?" "Not everything," admitted Victor. "I didn't know you would go this far, Alexander, threatening a child, my granddaughter." "Luna is fine," a new voice intervened. Sophia entered the room, holding her daughter's hand. Robert Conti was arrested at the dock. The police were already watching him for other matters. "Sophia?" Alexander looked at her as if seeing a ghost. "How?" "Valerie," she explained. "She contacted me right after speaking with Mark. We arranged everything with the police. Robert wasn't as loyal as you thought. He sang like a canary. As soon as they showed him the evidence of your illegal activities," Luna ran to her father, who held her tightly. "Daddy, Uncle Alexander showed me some pictures of when you were little. You looked happy." "I was, sweetheart," said Mark, stroking his daughter's hair. "And I still am, thanks to you and your mum." Alexander watched the scene with empty eyes. All his plans, all his manipulations were crumbling like a house of cards. "You don't understand," he murmured. "It was supposed to be different. It was supposed to..." "Supposed to what?" asked Victor, stepping closer to his son. "You were supposed to destroy your brother? Break a family? Win over a woman who never loved you? What did you really hope to achieve?" "I wanted..." Alexander slumped onto the piano bench. "I wanted to be loved like him. I wanted someone to look at me the way Sophia looks at him. I wanted..." "You wanted the impossible," Sophia said gently. "You can't force love, Alexander. You can't buy it or steal it." "And now?" Alexander asked, his voice breaking. "Will you report me?" Victor looked at his children, then at his granddaughter, and finally at Sophia. In that moment, he saw clearly all the mistakes he had made as a father. How could he have been so blind? "No," he finally said. "We won't report you, but you will have to face the consequences of your actions." "What does that mean?" "It means you will go to a specialized clinic," Victor said firmly. "You will receive the help you need. And when you're ready, if you're ready, you can come back, not to the company, but to the family." "And me?" Mark asked. "What happens now?" Victor approached his eldest son. "I was wrong with both of my sons. I tried to control you, to mold you according to my desires. But you had the courage to choose your own path. And look at what you've created, a real family based on love and not power." He turned to Alexander. "And you, my son, still have a chance to find your own way. Not the one I chose for you, but the one your heart truly desires." Luna, with the innocence of a child, approached her. "Uncle." "You can be happy too, Uncle Alexander. You just have to let go of the anger." Alexander looked at his niece, and for the first time in years, a tear rolled down his face. Sophia squeezed Mark's hand, while Victor watched the scene with a mix of pain and hope. The light of the sunset filtered through the old windows of the villa, illuminating the dusty piano. Somewhere in the echo of those walls, it seemed you could still hear the notes of Chopin, Helen's favorite, speaking of forgiveness and redemption. The weight of forgiveness. The morning after the events at the villa, Sophia was preparing breakfast in their small kitchen. Luna was still asleep, exhausted from the events of the previous day. Mark was sitting at the table, an untouched cup of coffee in front of him, lost in thought. "A penny for your thoughts," Sophia said, placing a hand on his shoulder. Mark covered her hand with his own. "I'm thinking about Alexander, about how all of this could have been avoided if only..." "If only what?" Sophia sat down beside him. "If only your father had been different. If only you had noticed the signs earlier. You can't torture yourself like this, love." "But I'm his older brother." Mark shook his head. "I should have protected him. Instead, I let him drown in his obsessions." At that moment, the doorbell rang. It was Victor, surprisingly casual in a pair of jeans and a cashmere sweater. "May I come in?" he asked almost timidly. Sophia gestured for him to sit. "Would you like a cup of coffee, Mr. Salvador?" "Victor, please," he smiled weakly. "And yes, a coffee would be perfect." He sat down at the table with them, suddenly looking much older and more tired. "I took Alexander to the clinic this morning. It was difficult." "How is he?" Mark asked. "Fragile," Victor replied. "The doctor says he has years of accumulated emotional trauma, repressed anger, but he's willing to work on himself. And that's a start." Sophia placed a cup of coffee in front of him. "It's brave of him to accept help." "Yes," Victor looked at her with gratitude. "Sophia, I owe you both an apology. The way I treated you when you got married..." "It's water under the bridge," Sophia interrupted gently. "No, it's not," Victor insisted. "I let my pride, my obsession with control, ruin my children's lives. Alexander, it's partly my fault that it turned out this way." "Dad," Mark leaned towards him, "you were also a victim of your own demons, of the weight of the Salvador family's expectations." "Maybe," admitted Victor, "but that doesn't justify my actions. I almost lost both of my children because of my blindness." A sound of light footsteps interrupted them. Luna was at the kitchen door, her hair messy from sleep. "Grandpa!" she exclaimed, running to hug him. Victor held her tightly, his eyes moistening. It was the first time Luna had called him that. "Good morning, Princess," he said in a hoarse voice. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes," she replied, climbing onto his lap. "I dreamed that we were playing the piano at the retreat all together. Uncle Alexander was there too, and he was smiling." The adults exchanged a moved glance. "You know," Victor said, stroking his granddaughter's hair, "that piano belonged to your grandmother Helen. She was an extraordinary musician." "Really?" Luna's eyes lit up. "Could you teach me how to play?" "Me?" Victor seemed surprised. "I'm not as good as she was, but I would love to." Sophia watched the scene with a smile. "Maybe we could have the piano restored and bring it here." "Here?" Mark looked at her in disbelief. "But there's no space." "Then perhaps," Victor interjected cautiously, "you could consider moving to a bigger house. I have a property in the Brera district that's just gathering dust." "Dad," Mark began to protest, but Victor raised a hand. "This isn't an attempt to buy or control you. It's a grandfather who wants to do something nice for his family, to make up for lost time." Sophia and Mark looked at each other. Years of mistrust and pain were slowly melting under the warmth of this new beginning. "We could at least take a look," Sophia said softly. "It doesn't mean we have to accept." "And could we invite Uncle Alexander when he's feeling better?" Luna asked innocently. A silence filled with emotion filled the kitchen. Victor was the one to break it. "If he wants to, and when he's ready," he said cautiously. "Healing takes time, sweetheart. But family, true family, knows how to wait." New beginnings. 3 months later, Mark's organic coffee shop was finally ready for its grand opening. The building in the Brooklyn neighborhood had been completely renovated, with large windows letting in natural light and walls decorated with photos of local producers and works by emerging artists. Sophia oversaw the final preparations, arranging fresh flowers on the tables, while Luna helped set out the menus, proud of her neat handwriting. "The logo is perfect," said Valerie, who had become a constant presence in their lives after the events at the retreat. She was looking at the sign. "Helen's Cafe, a tribute to Mark's mother." Do you think she would have liked it? Mark asked, joining them. She would have loved all of this, Valerie smiled. She was a woman who believed in the power of beauty to transform lives. Victor arrived shortly after, carrying a gift, an old framed photo of Helen at her piano, smiling and radiant. I thought it might look good here. Mark took the photo with trembling hands. It's perfect, Dad. The cafe quickly filled with guests, friends, family, local journalists drawn to the story of the rebellious son of the Salvadors who had chosen a different path. But the real surprise came in the afternoon. Alexander entered the cafe thinner and less polished than before, but with a new light in his eyes. He hesitated at the door until Luna saw him. "Uncle Alexander!" She ran to hug him. The cafe seemed to hold its breath, but Alexander simply hugged his niece gently. "Hi, little one, what a nice place." Sophia approached, followed by Mark. "We're glad you came." "The doctor thinks I'm ready for short visits," Alexander said, his voice slightly uncertain. "And I wanted to see your dream come true, Mark." The two brothers looked at each other for a long moment. Then Mark took a step forward and embraced Alexander. "Welcome home, brother." Victor watched the scene from afar, his eyes glistening. Valerie approached him. "They're healing," she said softly. "Yes," Victor nodded, "though it will take time." "Time isn't an enemy when there's love," she replied. "Mark taught me that." Long ago, the day continued with a special energy. The cafe filled with laughter and conversation, the aroma of freshly roasted coffee and homemade pastries. Alexander stayed in a quiet corner, speaking softly with Luna, who proudly showed him her drawings, while Sophia and Mark moved among the guests, radiant in their moment of triumph. Later, as the sun began to set and the last guests left, the family gathered around a table. Luna had fallen asleep on Alexander's shoulder, and he looked at her with a mix of tenderness and regret. "I'm sorry," he said suddenly, "for everything." "We know," Sophia replied gently. "Therapy, it's helping," he continued. "I'm learning to see things differently, to understand that the power I was chasing wasn't what I truly needed." "And what do you need?" asked Mark. Alexander looked at his sleeping niece, then at his sister-in-law and brother, and finally at his father. "This. Family. Forgiveness. Learning to love myself before expecting love from others." Victor stood up quietly and walked to the piano they had brought from the villa. The first notes of Chopin filled the room, sweet and melancholic. "Mom's favorite," Mark smiled. "To heal the wounds," Victor nodded, "as she always said." Sophia took Mark's hand, while Alexander closed his eyes, letting the music cradle him. Outside, New York was preparing for the night, but inside Helen's cafe, a family was slowly finding its way back to healing. Lessons of the heart. The success of Helen's cafe had surpassed all expectations. 6 months after its opening, the cafe had become a landmark in the Brooklyn neighborhood, not only for its excellent coffee and welcoming atmosphere, but also for its job placement program for disadvantaged youth. One quiet morning, as Mark was reviewing the accounts in his small office at the back, a soft knock on the door interrupted him. "Come in," he said, without looking up from the papers. "You're as busy as ever, I see." Mark looked up, surprised to find Alexander at the door. His brother looked very different from the impeccable manager he once was, jeans, a casual shirt, and a more relaxed expression on his face. "Alexander, I didn't know you were leaving the clinic today." "It's a trial visit," Alexander explained, stepping into the office. "Dr. Bianchi thinks I'm ready for more social interactions." Mark gestured to a chair. "Sit down. Sophia just made a new blend you have to try." As Mark called Sophia for the coffee, Alexander looked around the office. It was small but cozy, with family photos on the walls and neat stacks of papers on the desk. So different from the luxurious offices of Salvador Financial, yet so much more authentic. "How's therapy going?" Mark asked when they were alone with their coffee. "Better than I thought," Alexander admitted. "I'm learning a lot about myself, about the reasons behind my actions." "I'm glad to hear that." "Mark," Alexander hesitated, There's something I need to tell you, something I realized during therapy. Mark waited in silence, giving his brother time to find the words. I wasn't really in love with Sophia, Alexander finally said. I was in love with the idea of her, with what she represented. The freedom to love, the ability to be happy despite everything. Everything you had and I desperately wanted. I know, Mark said gently. You do? Yes. I always knew it wasn't Sophia you truly wanted. It was the happiness you saw in us. Alexander looked down at his coffee cup. The doctor says I spent my whole life trying to be the perfect version of what Dad wanted, completely forgetting who I really was. And now? Have you discovered who you are? A faint smile appeared on Alexander's face. I'm starting. It's terrifying, you know, looking inside yourself and finding so much emptiness, so much repressed anger. At that moment, Luna peeked through the door. Dad, Grandma Helen is here for the piano lesson. Alexander looked at her confused. Grandma Helen, Luna's new piano teacher, Mark explained. She has the same name as Mom, and Luna decided it had to be a sign. Are you learning to play? Alexander turned to his niece. Luna nodded enthusiastically. Yes, and Grandpa says I'm almost as good as the real Grandma Helen. It's true, Victor confirmed, appearing at the door. He paused when he saw Alexander. Son, I didn't know you'd be coming today. It's a surprise for me too, Alexander said, standing up awkwardly. Stay, Luna said, taking his hand. You can listen to me play. I'm learning Grandma's favorite nocturne. Alexander glanced at his father, uncertain. Victor gave a slight nod. I'd love to, Alexander said, letting his niece guide him toward the piano in the cafe. As the room filled with Luna's hesitant but passionate notes, Mark watched his brother. There was something new in his eyes as he listened to his niece play, a tenderness, a vulnerability he had never allowed anyone to see before. Sophia approached Mark, resting her head on his shoulder. He's healing, she whispered. Yes, Mark smiled. We're all healing. Victor watched his children from across the room, his heart heavy with regrets, but also with hope. Perhaps it wasn't too late to make up for past mistakes. Perhaps, as Helen always said, music could truly heal the deepest wounds. Starting over Victor's proposal came during a quiet Sunday dinner at Mark and Sophia's home. They had moved into a house in the Brera neighborhood, an elegant apartment with a large living room where Grandma Helen's piano had found its new home. I've made a decision, Victor announced as Sophia served dessert. I want to divide the Salvador Empire. Mark looked at him surprised. What do you mean? I want to turn the company into a foundation, Victor explained. One part will handle traditional investments, but most of the funds will go to social projects like your cafe, Mark. But as it's the work of your life, Mark protested. Exactly, Victor smiled. And as such, I want it to leave a different legacy than the one I had imagined. I don't want it to be remembered just for power and money, but for the good it can do. Sophia sat down, intrigued. And how would it work? I've already spoken with my lawyers, Victor continued. The foundation will have two divisions, one managed by you, Mark, focusing on social and cultural projects, and one that will maintain the core investments, which could be managed by Alexander when he's ready. Alexander? Mark leaned forward. Have you talked to him about this? Not yet, Victor admitted, but his therapist says he's making significant progress. Work could be part of his healing process, a way to use his skills for something positive. Luna, who had been listening quietly, chimed in. Does that mean Uncle Alexander will come back to work with you? Only if he wants to, sweetheart, Sophia replied gently, and only when he's better. And if he doesn't want to, Mark asked. What if he prefers to do something completely different? Then we'll support him, Victor said with a firmness that surprised everyone. I've spent too much time trying to control my children's lives. It's time for each of them to find their own path. At that moment, the doorbell rang. It was Alexander, holding a cake. Sorry I'm late, he said, coming in. I had a longer therapy session than usual. Are you okay? Sophia asked, taking the cake. Yes, Alexander smiled weakly. We talked a lot about the future today, about what I want to do with my life. And what have you decided? Mark asked. Alexander sat down, accepting the cup of tea that Sophia handed him. I've thought a lot these past few months, about money, power, everything I thought was important, and I realized I don't want that life anymore. Victor looked at him intently. What do you want to do? I would like... Alexander hesitated, then continued with more confidence. I would like to study psychology. Help other people who have gone through what I've been through, and maybe one day I could even help the family business, but in a different way. An emotionally charged silence filled the room. It was Luna who broke it. You could help people be happy, she said with the simple wisdom of children. Like your doctor helped you. Alexander smiled at her, his eyes glistening. Exactly, little one. Victor cleared his throat. Well, this fits perfectly with my plans for the foundation. As Victor explained his idea, Mark watched his brother's face. There was a new light in his eyes, a peace he had never seen before. You don't have to decide right away, Mark said when Victor finished. You have time to think about it. I know, Alexander replied, and that's what makes everything different this time. It's not an obligation, not an expectation, it's a choice. My choice. Sophia suddenly stood up. I think this moment deserves something special. She walked over to the piano and began to play Helen's favorite nocturne. Luna ran to sit beside her, following the notes with bright eyes. Victor watched the scene with a touched smile, while Mark and Alexander exchanged a look of understanding. The music filled the room, carrying with it memories of the past and promises for the future. A family that had risked tearing itself apart was slowly learning to rebuild, stronger and wiser than before. The conference room at Salvador Financial was packed with journalists and photographers. The announcement of the transformation of the family empire into a charitable foundation had drawn the attention of all of New York. Victor Salvador, standing at the podium, appeared surprisingly serene as he explained his vision for the future of the company. For too long, he said, his voice steady, success has been measured only in terms of profits and power. Today, the Salvador Foundation begins a new chapter, where true success will be measured by the positive impact we have on society. From the front row, Mark watched his father with pride. Beside him, Sophia held his hand while Luna, dressed in her finest outfit, listened intently to her grandfather. The foundation will have two main divisions, Victor continued, the social and cultural development division, led by my son Mark, will focus on projects that promote education, the arts, and social entrepreneurship. The investments division, which retains the core business of the company, will be managed by a team of seasoned professionals with a particular focus on ethics and sustainability. Journalists snapped photos frantically, while the attendees murmured among themselves. The transformation of one of the most powerful financial empires in the United States into a charitable foundation was unprecedented. And what about your son Alexander? Asked a journalist. There have been rumors about his absence from the company in recent months. Victor smiled calmly. My son Alexander is following his personal path. He has chosen to dedicate himself to the study of psychology, and he has the full support of the family in this decision. A murmur of surprise swept through the room. Mark glanced toward the back of the room, where Alexander, standing near the exit, gave a slight nod. After the press conference, the family gathered in Victor's office. Luna immediately ran to the large window, fascinated by the view of the city. It went well, said Sophia, serving coffee to everyone from an elegant set that once belonged to Helen. Better than I had hoped, Victor admitted. He turned to Alexander. How do you feel? Strangely free, Alexander replied. For the first time, I don't feel the weight of expectations on my shoulders. How's university? Mark asked. It's different, Alexander smiled. Most of my classmates are almost 20 years younger than me, but I'm learning things I never imagined. Professor Ricci says my personal experience could be valuable in the field of corporate psychology. You could help other people who feel trapped like you did, Sophia said softly. That's what I hope, Alexander nodded. He walked over to Luna, who was drawing on the large conference table. What are you drawing, little one? Our family, she replied, showing him the drawing. Look, here's Grandpa playing the piano with me. Here's Mom and Dad at the cafe, and here's you helping people be happy." Alexander felt his eyes fill with tears. In Luna's drawing, he was depicted with a big smile, surrounded by smiling figures. "It's beautiful," she said in a hoarse voice. Victor stepped closer to look at the drawing. "You know, Luna, your grandmother Helen always said that children see the truth better than adults." "I wish I could have known her," Luna said thoughtfully. "You know her through her music," Mark said, "through the piano, through the stories we tell about her." Sophia suddenly stood up. "I have an idea. Why don't we organize a concert at Helen's cafe? Luna could play and we could invite other young musicians from the neighborhood too." "A benefit concert," Mark added enthusiastically. "It could be the first official event of the foundation." "I like the idea," Victor said. "Helen would have been happy to see music used to help others." Alexander cleared his throat. "It could help with the organization, as part of my social psychology internship." "Really?" Luna looked at him with bright eyes. "Yes," he smiled. "I could take care of involving some organizations that work with struggling young musicians." As the family discussed the details of the concert, Victor found himself observing the scene with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. His empire was changing, transforming into something completely different from what he had imagined. But, looking at his children, his daughter-in-law and his granddaughter, he realized it was exactly what needed to happen. Rediscovered harmonies. Helen's cafe was unrecognizable that evening. The tables had been moved to make room for rows of elegant chairs, and an improvised stage hosted the Salvador family's grand piano. The walls were decorated with artwork donated by local artists, all destined for a charity auction after the concert. Sophia oversaw the final preparations, making sure every detail was perfect. Mark was in the kitchen, personally preparing the small refreshments that would be served during the intermission. "I'm nervous," Luna confessed, already dressed in her concert attire, to Alexander, who was arranging the evening's programs. "It's normal," he replied gently. "Do you know what I used to do when I was nervous as a child?" Luna shook her head. "I would close my eyes and imagine that Grandma, Helen, was there with me, smiling and encouraging me. It always worked." "But I never knew her," Luna said sadly. "No, but you know her through her music." Alexander knelt beside her. "And tonight, when you play her favorite nocturne, it will be like she's here with us." Victor entered the cafe, pausing for a moment to take in the scene. His son, once so full of anger and resentment, was now gently comforting his niece. The change was almost miraculous. "Dad!" Luna ran to hug him. "Look what Uncle Alexander did for the concert." Victor glanced at the elegantly printed programs. Alongside the names of the young musicians who would perform, there was a long note about the history of Helen's Cafe and the new Salvador Foundation. "It's excellent work," he said, looking at Alexander with approval. "I thought it was important to tell the full story," Alexander explained, "how a cafe born out of love could transform into something greater." The cafe began to fill up. There were familiar faces from the neighborhood, regular customers of the cafe, but also important figures from the financial and cultural world of New York. Valerie arrived with her husband and children, immediately greeted by Sophia with a warm hug. The concert began with a young violinist, one of the kids supported by the new foundation. His music, initially hesitant, grew more confident as the audience responded warmly. Then it was Luna's turn. Alexander accompanied her to the piano, whispering, something in her ear that made her smile. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne filled the cafe, and for a moment it seemed as if time stood still. Mark reached for Sophia's hand in the darkness. Victor, sitting in the front row, closed his eyes, letting the music transport him back in time to when Helen used to play this same piece in their living room. Alexander, standing at the back of the room, watched his niece play with a pride he had never felt for any financial success. His phone vibrated silently. It was a message from his therapist congratulating him on organizing the event. When the last note faded, there was a moment of perfect silence before the room erupted in applause. Luna stood up from the piano, giving a small bow as her teacher had taught her. During the intermission, as guests mingled, enjoying the refreshments prepared by Mark, Victor gathered his family in a quiet corner of the cafe. "So I want to say something," he began, his voice unusually emotional. "Looking at all of you tonight, I realized Helen was right. True wealth isn't in bank accounts or power. It's in moments like this, when music, art, and love come together to create something special." "Dad," Mark started, but Victor raised a hand. "Let me finish. I've spent my life trying to build an empire that would last for generations. But you, all of you, have built something far more precious, a real family, united not by fear or duty, but by love." Luna, still excited from her performance, hugged her grandfather. "I love you, Grandpa." Alexander looked at his father and brother, then at Sophia, and finally at his niece. "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad I lost that empire, because I gained something much more important." Sophia smiled through her tears. "A family." "A family," Victor confirmed. "And this time we'll do things the right way. First steps into the future." It was a spring morning when Alexander entered the university auditorium for his first presentation as a psychology student. His research project, The Impact of Family Dynamics in the Business World, had caught the attention not only of his professors, but also several industry professionals. In the front row of the audience sat his entire family. Mark and Sophia had closed Helen's cafe for the occasion. Luna was wearing her favorite dress, and Victor, surprisingly casual in a blue sweater, looked prouder than he had ever been for any financial deal. "Family dynamics in businesses," Alexander began, his voice steady despite his nerves, "are often a minefield of unspoken expectations, hidden rivalries, and shattered dreams. I know this well, because I've lived it firsthand." A thoughtful silence fell over the room as Alexander shared his personal experience, transforming the pain of the past into valuable lessons for the future. "But the real discovery," he continued, "is that change is possible. Wounds can heal, bonds can be rebuilt, and success can be redefined in terms of authentic relationships rather than power and control." Luna listened, fascinated by her uncle. At 9 years old, she understood more than the adults thought, and seeing Alexander speak so passionately about their family filled her with pride. After the presentation, as students and professors congratulated Alexander, Victor approached his son. "You were extraordinary," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Really?" Alexander looked at him, surprised. "I thought you'd find all this a bit impractical." "I've learned," Victor smiled, "that there are many different kinds of wisdom, and what you shared today could help many families avoid our mistakes." Sophia approached with Luna. "Alexander, Luna has something to tell you." The little girl pulled a folded piece of paper from her purse. "I made a drawing for your office." Alexander carefully unfolded it. It was a portrait of him speaking to a group of people, all with big smiles on their faces. Above the drawing, Luna had written in neat handwriting, "Uncle Alexander helps people find happiness." "It's perfect," he said, his eyes glistening. "I'll hang it in my first counseling office." "Speaking of the office," Mark chimed in, "we have a surprise for you." "A surprise?" "The foundation," Mark explained, "has decided to open a counseling center for entrepreneurial families, a place where people can receive psychological support and business consulting together. And we'd like," Victor added, "for you to be its director once you complete your studies." Alexander looked at his family, overwhelmed. "But I'm still a student with unique experience," Sophia said gently. "Who better than you to understand the challenges these families face?" "And besides," Luna added with her childlike logic, "you've already helped our family. Now you can help others too." Alexander found himself laughing and crying at the same time. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Mark suggested, smiling. "The center will be right next to Helen's cafe. You can have all the free coffee you want. And you can come hear me play the piano any time," Luna added excitedly. Alexander looked at the smiling faces of his family, reflecting on how far they had come. From the darkness of his obsession to the light of this new beginning, the journey had been long and difficult, but it had been worth it. "Yes," he finally said. "Yes to all of it." Victor placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Your mother would be so proud of you, of all of us." I know, Alexander said softly. Sometimes when I'm at Helen's cafe and I hear Luna playing her favorite nocturne, it's like I can feel her smiling. The family left the university together, heading to Helen's cafe for a private celebration. As they walked, Luna held both her uncle's and grandfather's hands, skipping happily between them. "You know what I think?" the little girl said suddenly. "I think Grandma Helen helped us become a real family." "How?" Alexander asked curiously. "With music," Luna replied simply. "The music reminded us how to love each other." The melodies. Of tomorrow, Helen's cafe was particularly busy that afternoon. The aroma of freshly roasted coffee blended with the notes of the piano, where Luna was rehearsing for her first solo recital. Sophia oversaw the service while Mark was busy in a meeting with local coffee producers in his office. Alexander, sitting at a corner table, was reviewing the final details of his project for the counseling center. The walls around him were now decorated with family photos, including a beautiful restored and enlarged image of Helen at the piano. "How are the preparations going?" Victor asked, joining his son with 2 cups of coffee. "All right," replied Alexander. "The center will open in 2 months. We already have several families interested." "I wasn't talking about the center," Victor smiled. "I was talking about your graduation." Alexander blushed slightly. At 42, he was about to graduate in psychology with top honors. "The ceremony is next week." Luna insisted on playing something special. "Of course," Victor sipped his coffee. "That girl has inherited her grandmother Helen's talent." Mark stepped out of his office at that moment, a satisfied smile on his face. "The deal with the small producers cooperative is done. We'll start serving their coffee next month." "That's great news," said Sophia, joining them. "And it fits perfectly with the opening of Alexander's center." Luna finished playing and ran to their table. "How did I do?" "Wonderfully," replied Alexander, making room for her beside him. "But you seem worried about something." Luna hesitated for a moment. "I've decided what I want to play for your graduation, Uncle." "Really? And what have you chosen?" "I composed something myself," she said timidly. "It's called The Reunited Family." A moved silence fell over the table. Victor was the first to break it. "You composed a piece?" he asked, his voice trembling with emotion. Luna nodded. "My teacher says I have a gift, like Grandma Helen, and I wanted to create something special for Uncle Alexander, to thank him." "Thank me?" Alexander looked at her, confused. "For what?" "For coming back to us," Luna replied simply. "For choosing love over anger." Sophia discreetly wiped away a tear, while Mark hugged his daughter with pride. Would you play Fit for us?" Alexander asked softly. Luna returned to the piano, and the first notes of her composition filled the cafe. It was a sweet and complex melody, starting with melancholic tones and then transforming into something bright and hopeful. As they listened, each family member found themselves reflecting on their own journey. Victor thought about how his dream of an empire had turned into something much more precious. Mark reminisced about his decision to follow his heart, which had led to all of this. Sophia recalled the difficult moments when she had feared losing everything, and how instead she had gained a larger and stronger family. And Alexander felt every note as a step in his healing journey. From the darkness of obsession to the light of acceptance and love. When the last note faded, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. It's beautiful," said Alexander, hugging his niece. "Just like our family," added Luna. Victor stood up, walking over to the piano. "Helen would be so proud, not just of the music, but of all of us, of how we've learned to be a real family." Sophia took Mark's hand, resting her head on his shoulder. "Who would have thought? From a simple cafe all of this was born." "It wasn't the cafe," Mark smiled. "It was love. The love that made us risk everything, that made us fall and get back up, that taught us to forgive." Alexander looked at his family gathered around the piano, his heart full of gratitude. "You know what I think? That maybe this was the real empire we were meant to build. Not one of bricks and money, but one of bonds and love." "And music," added Luna, making everyone smile. The afternoon sun filtered through the large windows of Helen's cafe, illuminating the photo of Helen at the piano. And for a moment, it seemed as if she too was smiling, happy to see her family finally in harmony, playing the most beautiful melody of all, that of love rediscovered. Graduation Day. The university's grand hall was packed with people for the graduation ceremony. Alexander, seated among the graduates, felt strangely emotional. At 42, he was the oldest in the group, but for the first time in his life, he didn't mind being different. In the front row, his family watched him with pride. Luna, elegant in her concert dress, held the sheet music of her composition in her hands. Sophia and Mark held hands, while Victor, unusually informal in a dark blue suit without a tie, couldn't hide his emotion. "Doctor in Psychology, Alexander Salvador," called the dean. As Alexander stood to receive his diploma, spontaneous applause filled the room. Many of those present knew his story, his journey of transformation from a ruthless businessman to a determined psychology student committed to helping others. His thesis on family dynamics in businesses, continued the dean, represents a significant contribution to the field of organizational psychology, with the highest honors and distinction. Alexander received his diploma with trembling hands. He looked toward his family and saw Luna blowing him a kiss, while Mark nodded with pride and Sophia wiped away a tear. After the ceremony, while the other graduates celebrated with champagne and photos, the Salvador family headed to Helen's cafe, where a more intimate celebration awaited them. The cafe had been decorated with fresh flowers and small lights, and the piano had been moved to the center of the room. Luna sat at the instrument, her small but confident hands on the keys. "This is for you, Uncle," she said, and began to play her composition, The Reunited Family. The notes filled the cafe, telling a story of loss, pain, but also hope and redemption. Alexander closed his eyes, letting the music carry him through his personal journey. "She's extraordinary," whispered Victor, standing beside him. "Just like her grandmother." "Yes," Alexander agreed, "but in a different way. Helen played with passion, Luna plays with wisdom. It's incredible how deeply a child can understand." Sophia approached with 2 cups of coffee. "Children see the truth more clearly than we adults do. Luna has always seen the good in you, even when you couldn't see it yourself." Mark joined them, carrying a large envelope. "I have a gift for you, brother." Alexander opened the envelope and pulled out some documents. They were the final plans for the family counseling center, but there was something new. "The Helen Salvador Family Counseling Center," he read aloud. "We think it's the perfect name," said Mark. "A place where families can find healing and harmony, just as we have." "And look at the last page," added Sophia with a smile. Alexander turned the page and was left breathless. It was a list of business families who had already booked consultations, some of the most prominent names in New York. "How your thesis made the rounds in the right circles," explained Victor. "Many families saw themselves in our story. They want to avoid our mistakes." Luna finished playing and ran over to them. "Did you like it, Uncle?" Alexander lifted her into his arms, even though she was almost too big for it now. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard, little one. You've given me the most precious gift." "More precious than your diploma?" she asked with a mischievous smile. "Much more," Alexander laughed. "The diploma tells me I studied well. Your music tells me I am loved. And that's the most important lesson I've ever learned." Victor raised his glass. "To Alexander, and to his new beginning. And to family," added Mark. "And to music," concluded Luna, making everyone smile. As the sun set over New York, the Salvador family continued to celebrate in their little cafe. The aroma of coffee mingled with the notes of the piano, created by a child who had inherited not only her grandmother's talent, but also the ability to heal hearts through music. The circle of life. A year after Alexander's graduation, the Helen Salvador Family Counseling Center had become a reference point for business families across Italy. On a bright spring morning, Alexander was preparing his office for a particularly important session. "Are you nervous?" asked Sophia, entering with 2 cups of coffee from Helen's cafe. "A little," admitted Alexander, arranging the photos on his desk. There was one from his graduation day, one of Luna at the piano, and of course the restored photo of Helen. It's the first time I'll be counseling a family so similar to ours. That's why you'll be perfect, Sophia smiled. Who? Better than you to understand what they're going through. From downstairs came the notes of the piano. Luna was rehearsing for her first major concert at the Metropolitan Opera House in New York, an event that had filled the entire family with pride. I can't believe how far we've come, said Alexander, looking out the window at the lively Brooklyn neighborhood. I can, replied Sophia, because beneath all the anger and pain there was always a heart capable of love. We just had to find the courage to listen to it. A light knock on the door interrupted their conversation. It was Mark. Mr. Ricci and his daughter are here, he announced. Alexander nodded, preparing to welcome his new clients. Before Sophia left, he stopped her. Sophia, he called hesitantly, thank you for never stopping to believe that I could change. She smiled. That's what family does. It believes in you even when you don't believe in yourself. As Sophia and Mark returned to the cafe, Alexander greeted his clients. Mr. Ricci was an imposing man, very much like Victor had been years ago. His daughter, a young woman with sad eyes, painfully reminded him of himself. Welcome to the Helen Salvador Center, he said warmly. I'm here to listen to your story. Meanwhile, at Helen's cafe, Victor was listening to Luna rehearse for her concert. The little girl had inherited not only Helen's talent, but also her ability to touch hearts through music. Grandpa, Luna suddenly asked, pausing, do you think Grandma Helen would be happy to see our family now? Victor sat down beside her on the piano bench. I'm sure she would, sweetheart. You know what she always said? That music has the power to heal broken hearts and unite lost souls. Like it did with us? Exactly like it did with us, Victor smiled. Her music, through you, has helped us remember how to love each other. Luna began to play again, but this time it was a different melody, one Victor had never heard before. Is it new? He asked. Yes, Luna replied without stopping. I called it The Circle of Love. It's about how love can be lost and then found again, just like what happened to our family. Victor felt his eyes fill with tears. In that little girl, he saw not only Helen's talent, but also the wisdom he had spent a lifetime learning. Mark and Sophia joined them, drawn by the new melody. Soon after, Alexander came down from his office, having finished his first session. How did it go? Mark asked. Good, Alexander replied. They have a lot of work to do, but they've taken the first step. They asked for help. Like you did, Sophia said softly. Like we all did, Victor corrected. Luna finished playing and turned to her family. I've decided I'll perform this piece at the Metropolitan Opera House. I want other families to know there's always hope. Alexander approached the piano, looking at the photo of Helen that now dominated the cafe wall. You know, Luna, your grandmother always said that music is the language of the heart, and your heart, little one, speaks with a wisdom beyond your years. The family gathered around the piano as the first afternoon customers began to enter the cafe. The aroma of coffee blended with the piano notes, creating that unique atmosphere that had made Helen's cafe a special place. The empire Victor had dreamed of had transformed into something completely different, but infinitely more precious. It wasn't made of bricks and money, but of musical notes and coffee cups, of hugs and forgiveness, of second chances and unconditional love. The night of the debut. The Metropolitan Opera House shone with lights on the evening of Luna's debut. At 10 years old, she was the youngest soloist to perform in a benefit concert organized by the Salvador Foundation. The program included her original composition, The Circle of Love, and Helen's favorite nocturne. In the dressing room, Luna sat in front of the mirror as Sophia fixed her hair. Her blue dress, personally chosen by Alexander, gave her an almost ethereal air. Are you nervous, sweetheart? Sophia asked, noticing her daughter's trembling hands. A little, Luna admitted. What if I'm not as good as Grandma Helen? Oh, sweetheart, Sophia knelt beside her. You don't have to be as good as anyone. You just have to be yourself. A soft knock on the door announced Alexander's arrival. May I come in? Luna ran to hug him. Uncle, did you finish your session with the Riccis? Yes, he smiled. And you know what? Mr. Ricci and his daughter will be here tonight. They've made great progress, just like our family. Really? Yes, and your music will help them heal even more. Alexander pulled a small box from his pocket. I have something for you. Luna opened the box and found a delicate silver bracelet with a violin key charm. It was Grandma Helen's, Alexander explained. I found it among her things when we were organizing the villa. I thought you should have it now. Luna's eyes filled with tears. It's beautiful. Just like you, little one, said a voice from the door. It was Victor, elegant in his tuxedo, with Mark by his side. The whole family, Sophia smiled. We couldn't miss it, Mark said, hugging his daughter. This is a special moment. Victor approached the piano in the corner of the dressing room, gently running his hand over the keys. Helen always played a few notes before every concert. She said it helped calm her nerves. Luna sat down at the piano and played a few notes of the nocturne. The tension in her shoulders seemed to melt away immediately. See, Victor smiled. Music always knows what we need. A stage assistant knocked on the door. Miss Salvador, 5 minutes. The family prepared to leave the dressing room, but Luna held Alexander back. Uncle, can I ask you something? Of course, sweetheart. Do you think people will understand the message of my music? That love can heal everything? Alexander knelt down to look her in the eyes. Luna, your music has already worked miracles. It helped heal our family, and tonight it will help other families find their way. Like you do with your patients at the center? Exactly, he smiled. I use words, you use music. But the message is the same. It's never too late to start over, to forgive, to love. Luna hugged her uncle tightly. I love you, Uncle Alexander. I love you too, sweetheart. Now go enchant the world. As Luna made her way to the stage, the family took their seats in the front row. The theater was packed with people, many of whom were families Alexander had helped at the Helen Salvador Center. The lights dimmed, and an expectant silence fell over the room. Luna appeared on stage, small but determined in front of the grand piano. She sat down, adjusted Helen's bracelet, and began to play. The first notes of the nocturne filled the theater, and for a moment it seemed as though Helen was there with them, smiling at her granddaughter, who was carrying on her legacy of love through music. Sophia squeezed Mark's hand, while Victor and Alexander exchanged a moved glance. Their little Luna was showing the world that the most precious empire isn't made of money or power, but of musical notes that speak directly to the heart. The applause that followed Luna's performance was overwhelming. The audience at the Metropolitan Opera House rose to their feet, moved not only by the young pianist's technical mastery, but by the deep emotion she had conveyed through her music. When she began to play The Circle of Love, her original composition, many in the audience found themselves with tears in their eyes. The melody told a story of loss, redemption, and rebirth that touched deep chords in everyone who listened. From his seat in the front row, Alexander noticed Mr. Ricci quietly crying, his hand tightly holding his daughter's. Other families he had helped at the center showed similar signs of emotion. Luna's music was doing what his words tried to do every day: heal broken hearts. After the concert in the theater's foyer, the family gathered around Luna. The little girl seemed to glow with her own light, Helen's bracelet sparkling on her wrist. You were magnificent, said Victor, hugging his granddaughter. Helen would be so proud of you. She is, Luna said confidently. I felt her while I was playing. She was there with us. Sophia wiped away a tear. Yes, darling, she was there. And she's here now in all of us. Mark looked at his reunited family, his wife Sophia, who had brought so much love into their lives, his father Victor, who had learned that true power lies in love, his brother Alexander, who had found the strength to change, and his precious Luna, who through music had helped heal the wounds of the past. You know, Alexander said thoughtfully, today at the center, I helped a family start their healing journey. But tonight, Luna, your music did in a few minutes what I try to do in months of therapy: Really? Luna's eyes lit up. Yes, music speaks a universal language, the language of the heart, and you, little one, have a special gift for speaking. Tayasim, Mr. Ricci approached the group with his daughter. Miss Luna, he said with a moved voice, your music. It made us understand things we've been trying to say to each other for years. Luna smiled shyly. Grandma Helen's music helped me understand that love is never truly lost. It transforms like the notes of a melody. Victor looked up, where a large portrait of a young Helen adorned a wall of the foyer. You're right, darling. Love is like music. It may seem to end, but it continues to live in our hearts, waiting only to be played again. The evening continued with a small celebration at Helen's Cafe, where friends and family gathered to celebrate Luna's debut. The place was filled with flowers, and the piano at the center of the room seemed to shine under the soft lights. Alexander found himself observing the scene with new eyes. The cafe he had once despised as a symbol of his brother's weakness had become the beating heart of their reborn family. The notes of the piano, the aroma of coffee, the laughter and conversations blended into a perfect symphony of love and healing. "What are you thinking about?" asked Sophia, bringing him a cup of his favorite coffee. "I'm thinking about how lucky we are," he replied. "We almost lost all of this to pride and anger, but love was stronger." "Love is always stronger," said Luna, joining them. "That's what my music says." The family gathered around the piano as Luna sat down to play once more. The notes of the Circle of Love filled the room, but this time there was something new in the melody, a particular sweetness that spoke of dreams fulfilled and hearts healed. Victor looked at his children, his daughter-in-law, and his granddaughter, and finally understood. The empire he had always dreamed of wasn't made of buildings and bank accounts, but of moments like this, of shared love and offered forgiveness, of music that heals and coffee that warms the soul. 1 year later, the Helen Salvador Center had become a landmark for struggling families from all over Italy. On a quiet spring morning, Alexander was reviewing some documents when an article in the newspaper caught his attention. From financial empire to beacon of hope, the extraordinary transformation of the Salvadors. The article spoke of the success of the foundation, Helen's Cafe, and the Family Counseling Center. But above all, it told the story of a family that had chosen love over power. A light knock on the door interrupted his reading. It was Victor with 2 cups of Mark's special coffee. "Have you read it?" he asked, pointing to the newspaper. "Yes," Alexander smiled. "It's strange to see our story told like this." "Strange, but beautiful," said Victor, sitting down. "You know, I got an interesting call this morning." "From whom?" "From the university. They want you to teach a course on the psychology of family dynamics in business." Alexander looked at him in surprise. "Me, a professor? Why not? Your experience is unique. You can help the next generation avoid our mistakes." From downstairs came the notes of the piano. Luna was rehearsing for her next concert, a series of benefit performances across Italy. "It's amazing how much she's grown," Alexander commented. "Not just as a musician," Victor added. "She has a wisdom beyond her years." "Like Helen," Alexander smiled. "Yes, but in a different way. Helen had a gift for music, but Luna has a gift for healing hearts through music." They paused when Sophia entered the office. "Sorry, but there's someone who wants to see Alexander." It was Robert Conti, the former friend who had tried to manipulate the situation a year ago. He looked older and more tired. "Alexander," he said hesitantly, I need help." Alexander looked at his father, who nodded slightly and left with Sophia, leaving them alone. "Have a seat," said Alexander, pointing to a chair. "My family is falling apart," Robert admitted. "I made the same mistakes you did. I put power before love, and now you want to change," Alexander completed. "Yes. I've seen what you Salvadors have managed to do, how you turned pain into something beautiful. I want to try, too." Alexander observed the man he had once considered an ally in his revenge. Now he saw him for what he was, another wounded soul seeking healing. "The road won't be easy," he said honestly. "It takes courage, humility, and the willingness to look within yourself. I know, Robert lowered his gaze, but I'm ready. At that moment, Luna's music grew more intense. It was The Circle of Love, but with a new variation that Alexander had never heard before. It's beautiful, Robert commented. It's the power of music, Alexander smiled. It reminds us that it's never too late to change, to heal, to start over. He stood up and walked to the window. The spring sun illuminated the Brooklyn neighborhood, where Helen's Cafe shone like a beacon of hope. You know, Robert, a year ago I was sitting where you are now, full of anger and resentment, but I've learned that true strength isn't in power or control, but in the ability to be vulnerable, to ask for help, to forgive. Robert nodded slowly. How do you do it? Where do you start? You start by listening, said Alexander, pointing to the piano downstairs. Listening to the music of the heart, the voices of those who love us, the silence that allows us to hear ourselves. Luna's music continued to fill the building, a melody of hope and rebirth that seemed to speak directly to the soul. You've already taken the first step, Alexander continued. You're here, and that, believe me, takes more courage than any financial operation. Robert smiled weakly. You're not the man I knew, Alexander. No, I am not, and I am grateful for that, every day. The melody of forgiveness. That evening, the family gathered for their traditional Sunday dinner at Helen's Cafe. The place was closed to the public, reserved just for them as it was every Sunday night. Mark was in the kitchen preparing his famous saffron risotto, while Sophia and Luna set the tables. Alexander was helping Victor choose a wine from the cellar they had built in the basement. Robert Conti, said Victor, examining a bottle. I never thought we'd see him again. Neither did I, admitted Alexander. But you know what? Seeing him today made me realize how far we've come. How so? A year ago, I was the one filled with anger and a desire for revenge. Now, I'm here, helping others find the same peace I've found. Victor set the bottle down and looked at his son. I'm proud of you, Alexander, not for what you do, but for the man you've become. The words struck Alexander straight to the heart. For years, he had sought his father's approval, and now that he had it, he realized he no longer needed it to be happy. When they returned upstairs, they found Luna at the piano, playing a new melody while Sophia and Mark danced slowly. Is it new? Alexander asked his niece. Yes, Luna smiled. I called it The Melody of Forgiveness. I composed it thinking about you and Robert. Alexander sat down beside her. How are you so wise, little one? I'm not wise, Luna laughed. The music knows what to say, I just listen to it. Dinner was served, and the family gathered around the table. Mark had prepared a full feast, and the aroma of the risotto mingled with the scent of freshly baked bread. I have some news, Sophia announced once everyone was seated. Helen's Cafe has been selected as one of the best socially responsible cafes in Italy. Really? Mark looked at her in surprise. Yes, they particularly appreciated our training program for disadvantaged youth and our collaboration with the Helen Salvador Center. That's not the only good news, Victor added. The foundation has received international recognition for our innovative approach to social business. Luna listened with bright eyes. Does that mean we're helping a lot of people? Yes, sweetheart. Alexander smiled. Many families are finding their way thanks to us. Like we found ours through Grandma Helen's music, Luna said simply. Mark raised his glass. To Helen, then, who taught us that true wealth lies in love. To Helen, everyone echoed. After dinner, while the adults chatted over cups of coffee, Luna returned to the piano. The notes of her new composition filled the cafe, blending with the laughter and conversations. Alexander watched the scene with a full heart, his brother and Sophia still as in love as the first day, his father finally at peace with himself. Luna, a miracle of music and love, and himself transformed by the power of forgiveness and acceptance. The empire his father had built had turned into something completely different, yet infinitely more precious. It was no longer made of skyscrapers and bank accounts, but of musical notes and coffee cups, of hugs and forgiveness, of second chances and unconditional love. The melody of forgiveness continued to resonate in the cafe, a promise of healing for anyone ready to listen. A legacy of love. The news arrived on a quiet autumn morning. The Helen Salvador Center had been selected for a prestigious international award for social innovation. The announcement coincided with the second anniversary of its opening. Alexander was preparing his acceptance speech when Luna entered his office, bringing with her the energy and light that defined her. "Uncle, I've composed something special for the ceremony," she announced, sitting beside him. "Really? And what's it called?" "The Legacy of the Heart," Luna replied with a smile. "It's about how love can change everything, just like it did. For our family." Alexander hugged his niece, still amazed at how a child could understand such profound truths. "You know," Luna said thoughtfully, "the other day I found an old diary of Grandma Helen's in the piano." "A diary?" Alexander looked at her with interest. "Yes, it had her thoughts on music, family, and you and Dad when you were little." Luna pulled a small leather-bound notebook from her bag, its pages yellowed with time. "I want to read you something." She opened the diary and began to read. "My sons are so different, yet so alike in their need for love. Mark seeks the freedom to be himself. Alexander seeks the approval he shouldn't necessarily need. If only they could see how precious they both are, precisely because of their differences." Alexander felt his eyes fill with tears. "I didn't know she was watching us so closely." "There's more," Luna continued. "Listen to this. Music has the power to heal broken hearts, to unite what is divided. One day I hope my children will find their melody of peace, just as I found mine through these notes." At that moment, Sophia entered the office with Mark and Victor. "What's that?" asked Mark, recognizing his mother's handwriting. "Grandma's diary," replied Luna. "I found it in the piano." Victor approached slowly, as if seeing a ghost. "Helen always wrote in it after playing. She said music allowed her to see the truth in our hearts." "And she was right," said Sophia softly. "Her music, through Luna, helped us rediscover that truth." Mark took the diary with trembling hands and read another passage. "A true empire is not made of bricks and money, but of moments of shared joy, of forgiveness offered, of unconditional love. I hope one day our family will understand that." "And we have," said Alexander, "even if it took us some time." Victor sat heavily in a chair. "Helen saw so far ahead. She saw the potential for healing in our family long before we could imagine it." Luna sat at the piano they had installed in Alexander's office and began to play her new composition. The notes of "The Legacy of the Heart" filled the room, weaving themes reminiscent of Helen's favorite nocturne with new melodies full of hope and rebirth. As the music flowed, the family found themselves reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. From an obsession with power to the discovery of true love, from the wounds of the past to the healing of the present. "You know what I think?" said Luna, still playing. "I think Grandma Helen never really left. She's here in her music, in her diary, in our hearts." Alexander looked at the photo of Helen on his office wall, then at his niece at the piano, then at his brother and sister-in-law, and finally at his father. He saw in each of them a piece of Helen's legacy, her music, her wisdom, her unconditional love. "You're right, little one," said Victor, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Helen lives in every note you play, in every heart we help heal, in every cup of coffee we serve with love. And in the center that bears her name," added Alexander, "a place where families can find the same healing we've found." Luna's music continued to fill the room, a melody that spoke of forgiveness and rebirth, of love rediscovered and bonds strengthened. It was Helen's legacy, living on through the generations, a legacy not of material wealth, but of the wealth of the heart. Symphony of Healing. The award ceremony took place in the Grand Hall of the Salvador Foundation, transformed for the occasion into an elegant auditorium. Helen's grand piano stood at the center of the stage, surrounded by her favorite white flowers. Among the audience were families the center had helped, young people trained at Helen's cafe, and individuals touched in some way by the Salvador's transformation. Robert Conti was also there, sitting in the back row with his family gathered beside him. Alexander stood to give his acceptance speech, but before he could begin, Luna gently interrupted him. "Uncle," she said into the microphone, "can I play my new composition first?" Alexander smiled and nodded, stepping back as his niece took her place at the piano. "This is The Legacy of the Heart," Luna announced. "I composed it thinking about Grandma Helen and how her love continues to heal people through our family." The first notes filled the hall, and a reverent silence fell over the audience. The melody told a story of transformation, of pain turned into beauty, of anger turned into forgiveness. As Luna played, images of the Salvador family scrolled on a screen behind her, archival photos of Helen at the piano, Mark and Alexander as children, the opening of Helen's Cafe, the inauguration of the center, moments of joy and healing captured. Over the past 2 years, when the final note faded, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Alexander rose to give his speech, his voice heavy with emotion. "2 years ago," he began, "I was a different man. I believed power was everything, that love was a weakness. But through a journey of forgiveness and healing, I discovered a truth my mother Helen had always known. True power lies in love." He paused, looking at his family in the front row. "This award doesn't just celebrate the success of the Helen Salvador Center. It celebrates the triumph of love over fear, of forgiveness over resentment, of healing over hurt. It celebrates every family that found the courage to ask for help, every heart that chose to open itself to change." Sophia held Mark's hand, while Victor looked on with pride at his children. "My mother Helen believed music could heal broken hearts," Alexander continued. "Through her granddaughter Luna, that music continues to heal. Through Helen's Cafe, warmth and hospitality continue to heal. Through this center, listening and understanding continue to heal." He turned to the image of his mother on the screen. "This award belongs to you, Mom. You who always saw beyond appearances, who always believed in the power of love. Your legacy lives on in every note Luna plays, in every family that finds its way to healing, in every heart that opens to love." Luna rose from the piano and ran to hug her uncle. Alexander lifted her into his arms, even though she was almost too big for it now. "And it belongs to you, little one," he said into the microphone. "You who remind us every day through your music that love is the most powerful force of all." The family joined them on stage, Mark and Sophia, Victor, and even Robert Conti, who had risen from his seat to offer congratulations. "The empire my father dreamed of," Alexander concluded, "has become something far more precious. A family that heals other families, a place where love always triumphs over power, where music continues to touch hearts, where coffee is served with a smile and a kind word." Luna returned to the piano and began to play again, this time Helen's favorite nocturne. And as the music filled the hall, the Salvador family looked out at the moved audience and knew that this was the true empire they had built. And too, empire of healed hearts, of souls rediscovered, of love that continues to grow and transform lives one note at a time. The return to the retreat. The decision to restore Helen's retreat came naturally as an extension of the family's healing journey. The ancient lakeside home, once a witness to so much pain, was ready for a new life. "I think we should turn it into a retreat for families from the center," Alexander proposed during a family meeting at Helen's Cafe. "A place where they can find peace and healing, just like it happened to us." Luna, who was flipping through Helen's diary, looked up. "I found something interesting," she said. "Grandma often wrote about the villa. She said that despite everything, she felt it would one day become a place of healing." Victor, sitting beside his granddaughter, smiled softly. Helen always saw the potential for beauty in things, even when they were covered in shadows. Mark and Sophia exchanged a glance. "We could open a second location of Helen's Cafe at the villa," Sophia suggested. "A place where families can feel at home while they work on their healing. And I could teach music to the children," Luna added enthusiastically. "Grandma Helen writes that music is especially powerful near water." The project took shape quickly. Architects were called, Plans were drawn and soon the villa began to transform. The old rooms were renovated with warm colors and cozy furnishings, the garden was carefully restored, and the old dock on the lake was rebuilt. But the heart of the project was the music room. Helen's grand piano, fully restored, returned to its place of honor, and the walls were decorated with family photos and musical scores. On the day of the inauguration, Luna sat at her grandmother's piano, trying out a new composition. Alexander watched her from the doorway, remembering the difficult moments they had experienced in that same room. "What are you thinking about, Uncle?" Luna asked, noticing his distant gaze. "How much has changed?" he replied, entering the room. "The last time I was here, I was full of anger and pain. Now you're full of love," Luna finished simply. Sophia entered the room with a tray of coffee. "The new cafe is ready. Mark is preparing everything for tomorrow." Victor joined them shortly after, carrying something wrapped in a velvet cloth. "I found this in the attic," he said, unveiling an old silver metronome. "It was Helen's. She used it to teach us rhythm when we were kids." Luna took it reverently. "Can I use it, Grandpa?" "Of course, sweetheart. Grandma would be happy to know it." Mark entered the room, the aroma of freshly roasted coffee following him. "The first guests will arrive tomorrow. A family from Turin. The father reminds me a lot of you, Alexander, how you were before." Alexander nodded understandingly. They too will find their way to healing, just like we did. Luna began to play, the old metronome keeping time on the piano. The melody was new, yet familiar, an echo of Helen's favorite nocturne mixed with something fresh and hopeful. "What's it called?" Sophia asked. "The Return Home," Luna replied. "Because that's what we're doing, right? We're coming home, but in a new way." Victor approached the window, looking out at the lake shining in the sunset. "Helen always said that home isn't a place, but a state of the heart. And our hearts, finally, have come home." The family gathered around the piano as Luna continued to play. Through the open windows, the lake breeze carried the scent of the garden's blooming flowers. The sound of the metronome blended with the piano notes, creating a rhythm that seemed to beat in sync with their healed hearts. Alexander looked at his family, his father at peace, his brother happy, Sophia radiant, and Luna, the miracle who had brought Helen's music into their lives in a new and wonderful way. The villa was no longer a place of pain and secrets, but a sanctuary of healing and hope. "You know what I think?" Luna said, still playing. "I think Grandma Helen is happy now. Happy that her home has become a place where people can find love just like we did." Her words resonated in the room along with the music, a simple yet profound truth that touched everyone's hearts. The Salvador Tower, once a symbol of power and division, had been reborn as a beacon of hope and healing, just like the family that now lived there with love. The waves of change. The villa's first guests arrived at dawn. It was a family from Turin, a stern-faced father, an exhausted-looking mother, and two teenage children who carefully avoided looking at each other. Alexander welcomed them on the porch, recognizing in them the same signs of suffering he had once seen in his own family. "Welcome to Helen's retreat," he said with a warm smile. "I'm Dr. Alexander Salvador." The father, a prominent industrialist named George Ferretti, shook his hand with excessive force. "I read your story in the papers, Dr. Salvador. It's interesting. How one can go from the world of finance to psychology. Sometimes we have to lose everything to find what truly matters," Alexander replied calmly. Luna appeared at the door with a tray of coffee freshly brewed by Mark. "Dad's coffee always helps start the day right," she said with her contagious smile. The two teenagers, Paul and Mary, looked up, intrigued by the presence of this confident young girl. "You're the pianist," Mary said timidly. "I watched your concert at the Metropolitan Opera House on YouTube." Luna nodded. "Do you like music?" "I play the violin," said Paul, speaking for the first time. "Or at least I used to before Dad decided it was a waste of time," Mary finished bitterly. George Ferretti stiffened, but before he could respond, Victor appeared on the porch. "You know, Mr. Ferretti," he said with the wisdom of years. "I once thought music was a distraction from real work too. Then I realized it was the very thing that kept our family's soul alive." Sophia led the family inside, where Helen's piano gleamed in the morning light. "This is the heart of the retreat," she explained. "Here, music has healed our family, and it continues to heal other families." Luna sat at the piano and began to play softly. Paul almost unconsciously moved closer to the instrument, drawn by the melody. "Do you know this piece?" Luna asked, making room for him on the bench. "It's Chopin," he replied, "the Nocturne in E-flat major. It was my grandmother Helen's favorite." Luna smiled. "Do you want to play it together?" As the two played, something in the room seemed to shift. The tension in the Ferretti's faces began to melt away, like ice in the sun. Mark arrived with more coffee and fresh pastries. "Coffee," he said with a smile, "like music has the power to bring people together." "You know, Mr. Ferretti," Alexander said as he served the coffee, "when I was in the world of finance, I thought success was measured in numbers on a spreadsheet. Now I know that true success is measured in the smiles I see, in families finding their harmony again." George Ferretti looked at his son at the piano, playing with a passion he hadn't seen in years. His wife had tears in her eyes, and his daughter Mary had moved closer to her brother, listening intently. "How do you do it?" he finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. "How do you learn to let go of control?" "You start by listening," Victor replied, sitting beside him, "not just to the music, but to the heartbeat of your family." Luna and Paul finished playing, and spontaneous applause filled the room. For the first time in months, the Ferretti family smiled together. "You see," Luna said, rising from the piano, "Grandmother Helen always said that music is like love. You can't control it, you can only feel it and let it transform you." Alexander watched the scene with a smile. A new family was beginning its journey toward healing just as they had. The circle continued, love expanded, and Helen's music continued to touch new hearts. From the lake came the sound of waves gently lapping the shore, a natural rhythm blending with the piano notes, creating a symphony of hope and rebirth. Helen's retreat, once a symbol of division, had become a beacon of light for lost souls seeking a home, the echo of love. It had been a year since Helen's retreat opened. On a serene summer evening, the Salvador family had gathered to celebrate not only the success of the recovery center, but also a special announcement from Luna. The lake sparkled under the sunset as guests gathered in the grand music hall. All the families who had passed through the retreat in the past year were there, including the Ferrettis, now transformed by their healing journey. Paul, the young violinist, had become one of Luna's most promising students. "I can't believe you're only 11, Paul said to Luna as he tuned his violin. "You're the best teacher I've ever had." Luna smiled, arranging the sheet music on the piano. "Music is a language everyone can understand. Grandmother Helen taught me that through her diary." Alexander watched the scene with pride. His father approached him, handing him a cup of Mark's special coffee. "Who would have thought," Victor reflected, "that our empire would transform into this? An empire of hearts instead of bank accounts," Alexander smiled. "Much more valuable, don't you think?" Sophia and Mark joined them, bringing the latest creation from Helen's Cafe's bakery, a cake decorated with chocolate violin keys. "Is Luna ready for her announcement?" Sophia asked. "More than ready," Mark replied, looking at his daughter with pride. Luna stood and walked to the center of the room. Silence fell naturally as everyone turned toward her. "A year ago," she began, her voice clear and confident, "this retreat was a place of painful memories. Today it is a sanctuary of healing, just as Grandmother Helen had always dreamed." She turned to the piano where Paul waited with his violin. "I've composed something special to celebrate this year of miracles. It's called The Echo of Love, and it's dedicated to all the families who have found their way to healing in this sacred place." The first notes of the piano blended with the sweet sound of Paul's violin. The melody told a story of transformation, of pain turned into hope, of darkness giving way to light. As they played, images from the past year flashed on a screen. Families arriving broken and leaving united. Children rediscovering the joy of music. Parents learning to listen with their hearts instead of judgment. Alexander looked at his brother, remembering their journey of reconciliation. Mark squeezed his shoulder, his eyes glistening with emotion. Victor, sitting beside a photo of Helen, seemed lost in memories. "Her music lives on," he murmured. "It lives through Luna, through every person who finds healing in this place." The melody reached its climax and Luna looked up at her family. "And now," she announced as the final notes faded, "I have some news to share. The Metropolitan Opera House has invited me to give a special concert, not just to perform, but to conduct an orchestra of young musicians from families who have found healing here at Helen's retreat." Applause erupted in the room. Paul lowered his violin, his eyes shining with excitement. "And that's not all," continued Luna. "The concert will be a charity event to raise funds for music scholarships for children from struggling families, because music, as Grandma Helen used to say, should be a right for everyone, not a privilege." Alexander found himself thinking about how far away those days seemed when money and power seemed to be all that mattered. Now, watching his granddaughter shine with passion and determination, he finally understood the true meaning of success. Sophia embraced her daughter, while Mark tried to hide his tears of pride. Victor slowly stood up and approached the piano. "Helen," he said with a moved voice, "she would be so proud. Not just of your music, Luna, but of how you've understood that the true gift isn't talent itself, but how you use it to help others." The evening continued with more performances, Paul on the violin, other families sharing their stories of healing through music. Mark's coffee warmed hearts as the notes filled the air, mingling with the sound of the lake waves. The empire Victor had dreamed of had transformed into something completely different, yet infinitely more precious. An empire built not on foundations of concrete and steel, but on musical notes and healed hearts, on shared cups of coffee and dried tears, on reborn dreams and rediscovered hope. The melody continues. On the evening of the concert at the Metropolitan Opera House, the theater was packed. On stage, an orchestra of young musicians waited, instruments ready. Paul, the first violinist, smiled encouragingly at Luna, who was preparing to conduct her first orchestra. In the audience, the Salvador family occupied the central box. Alexander, seated between his father and brother, felt his heart swelling with pride and gratitude. "It's incredible," whispered Mark, "how everything has changed." "Not everything," Sophia gently corrected. "The love was always there. We just had to learn to recognize it." Luna stepped onto the conductor's podium. Her blue dress shimmered under the theater lights, Helen's bracelet sparkling on her wrist. Before raising the baton, she turned to her family and smiled. The music that followed was something magical. The echo of love filled the hall, but this time it was different, enriched by the voices of an entire orchestra, each instrument adding its own voice to the story of healing and rebirth. Victor closed his eyes, letting the music carry him through the memories. Helen at the piano, his children playing in the villa, the dark moments of their separation, and finally, the light of reconciliation. Alexander thought of all the families he had helped at the center, how every story of healing had contributed to his own healing. Mark and Sophia held hands, their hearts beating to the rhythm of their daughter's music. When the final note faded, there was a moment of perfect silence before the theater erupted in applause. Luna turned to her orchestra, young musicians whose eyes shone with joy and fulfillment. After the concert, the family gathered in Luna's dressing room. The walls were covered with flowers, and on the table was a special cake from Helen's cafe. "You were wonderful, darling," said Sophia, embracing her daughter. "Grandma Helen would be so proud," added Victor, his voice hoarse with emotion. Luna took Helen's journal from her bag. "I found one last page I had never read before," she said. "May I share it with you?" The family gathered around her as she read, "Music is like love. It has no end. Even when a melody seems to conclude, its echo continues to resonate in the hearts of those who listen to it. And so it will be for our family. Even when I am no longer here, my love will continue to live through the music, through the smiles, through every moment of shared joy. This is the true empire I leave to my children, not wealth or power, but the infinite capacity to love and heal." Alexander felt the tears flow freely. "She was right," he said, "as always." "And look," said Luna, pointing to the date on the page. "She wrote it on the very day Dad was born, Mark hugged his daughter. Her melody continues through you, little one. Through all of us, Alexander corrected. In every family we help heal, in every cup of coffee we serve with love, in every note we play. Victor walked to the dressing room window, looking out at the lights of New York. You know what I think, Luna? You did much more than conduct an orchestra tonight. You conducted an orchestra of hearts, showing the world that true strength lies not in power or control, but in the ability to love and be loved. The family left the theater together, heading to Helen's cafe for a private celebration. The place was lit by candles, the piano ready for more music, the aroma of coffee filling the air. As Luna sat at the piano to play Helen's favorite nocturne, Alexander looked at his gathered family and thought about how far they had come. The empire his father had dreamed of had transformed into something much more precious. A legacy of love that continued to grow and heal, a melody that would never stop playing. And so in the notes of the piano, in the scent of coffee, in shared smiles and dried tears, the story of the Salvadors continued. No longer a story of power and control, but a symphony of love that continues to resonate, healing hearts and uniting souls one chord at a time.